So hello everyone. As you can figure out by now, I'm not in your meeting. I'm sad to miss the meeting. However, I'm in lovely Havana, Cuba. And believe it or not, I'm actually here for meetings. It's not a vacation. I'm part of a delegation sent by CPA Canada, and we're looking at how the economy in Cuba, as it transitions from a socialist economy, is not going full scale right away to a capitalist. So a lot of their industries are moving to the cooperative model, and we do a lot of cooperative accounting at St. Mary's University. So that's a summary of why I'm not there. So first of all, you have the reports there on the results of our year-to-date operations and our forecast up to the end of the year. So I'm going to deal with that first, and then I'm going to get into the budget for 2017. So I think it's easier if you follow along. You have both my written report and the schedule, but I think just look at the schedule with the numbers, and we'll work our way through that one. So in the second-hand column from the left, from the right-hand side of the page, you'll see our forecast for 2016. So this is based on the actual results that we've achieved up to the end of September, and then we're estimating what the results are going to be for the balance of the year. So for 2016, we are projecting to have total revenue of $540,000, and that's compared to our budget of $530,000. So we're a little bit down in donations and bequests, but we had a donation for the 60th anniversary event that we're planning on hosting in Vancouver, and we did a little bit better on our distributable income from our investments than we had planned. So while some revenue is down, it's offset by increases in other aspects of revenue. So the net effect is we're slightly better than we had thought we would be when we set our budget, which is good news. On the operating side of things, we are forecasting to spend $533,000 in total compared to our budget of $524,000, and we're up in a couple of areas, and one being you'll see the promotion line. The budget was $52,500. We're now forecasting that to be $62,000, and that mainly has to do with the production of the timeline, which is the foundation's history, and the Hope Bear book, and that is going to be done in time for the anniversary, but it is something that we would have done anyway, so it's not strictly an anniversary expense, so we've grouped it as a promotional expense. So that really accounts for the bulk of the increase. So that leaves us with an operating surplus of $7,000. However, we have some expenses to deduct from that. So we have our investment expense of $30,000, which is what we pay to the Burgundy folks for managing our investments. We have our consulting fees that we're paid to the Alfred Group, $48,000, and then this year's portion of the anniversary cost, which is $33,000 this year, and the remainder will be paid out next year. So before paying out any grants, we have a deficit of $104,000. Then we are proposing total grants and RFPs to be paid this year of $244,000. So we are looking at spending $100,000 for the balance of the year. We've already spent close to $144,000. We're looking at another $100,000 that would be approved in this board meeting. So that brings us to a deficit for the year of $348,000. So that is the overall results for this year. So now what I'll do is I'll move to the budget for 2017. So for 2017, we are projecting revenues of $545,000, and that's pretty much on par with what we're forecasting for this year. So we're looking for a slight increase in bequests and donations, $200,000, but it puts us back more with our actuals from 2015, for example. we have small increases in the other accounts, so at the end of it we're projecting $545,000 in revenue. Looking at our operating expenses, again, that's pretty much, we're kind of holding the line, and the increases there, we've got our standard cost of living increase. I've put in a provision for about 2%. I think CPI at the moment is around 1.8. Up to the end of September. The board travel, of course, is $45,000 because of the trip to Vancouver for the May meeting. In a typical year when both meetings are in Toronto, we would expect to spend around $30,000 there. And there's some small increases in other accounts. One, though, to note here is in the equipment and software maintenance, we have put in a provision of an extra $3,000, so bringing our total there to $7,500. And the idea here is throughout the upcoming year, we're going to be looking at getting some work done on these systems, so we'll have to hire some outside expertise in terms of programmers to fix up these two systems for us. So looking down the page here, so that leaves us with a deficit from operations, or sorry, not a deficit, a surplus from operations of $15,000. From there we have to deduct the $30,000 for the management expense fees and spend the remaining $42,000 of our overall two-year $75,000 budget for the anniversary program. So that brings us down to a deficit of $57,000. Then we are looking at grants and RFP for 2017, the grants from the general fund and the RFP totaling $130,000. $100,000 in grants and then three $10,000 grants for the RFP. And that's something we discussed at the Finance Committee, because as you can see, with that level of revenue and expenditures, we're still going to end the year with a deficit of $187,000. And we really don't think it's prudent for us to run a deficit that would be higher than that. A planned deficit. I mean, sometimes there's an unplanned deficit, but a planned deficit, really, we don't want to be any higher than that. We have to be very cognizant of the fact that as, we are an audited charity, the auditors are definitely going to be raising red flags if we continue to run deficits, because it does point to the viability of the organization in the long term. We do have a healthy contingency fund, but obviously once it's gone, it's gone. So we have to be very careful in using that contingency. So what it boils down to is pretty much in a given year with our existing level of donations, we really take in just enough to cover our operating expenses. We really don't have enough left over to fund the grants and the RFPs. The way we have been financing those for the past 3 years or so is because back in 2013 we had a significant unrestricted bequest of $760,000 that we've spread out over the 3 years. Then another thing that we've done over the past 3 years, we've really gone and looked in detail at all of the various trusts to see, is there any money left there that could be deployed to fit the criteria for some of the grants? And we've used pretty much all the money we have identified from these various trusts that we could reasonably say, yes, it fits the criteria for various grants. So what's happening now is that large bequest has dried up. We've used it, and we've pretty much, identified and have used the funds that we're allowed to use from the various trusts. So that's kind of where we are with our financial position. Now, I don't want to be alarmist. We're not in danger of going out of business or anything like that. But clearly, if we continue to run deficits year after year, we are going to deplete our reserve of $2.5 million. And, we have to be prudent, we have to be responsible, and not sort of kick this decision down the road and let another board solve it. I think the onus is on us to realize we're at a crossroads. We need to take action, and we need to get a plan of action in place. And certainly, whether that plan of of action is, you know, a fundraising strategy that we've talked about. That's one option, or whatever the board decides to do. In the interim, until we get things in order, for the short term, you know, for a couple of years, we're fine with drawing down on our contingency fund, but clearly the $2.5 million is going to run out sooner or later. So we discussed it at the Finance Committee, and we feel that even when there is a deficit, we should try to limit that deficit to no more than $200,000 a year. So that way you can, like, say to the auditors, look, it'll take us 10 years to deplete our contingency fund. So it shows that we have viability, but we also have to show not just the auditors, but certainly our stakeholders, that we do have a plan in place to ensure our future viability. So basically that's the recommended budget that we are, you know, putting forward for the board's consideration, and a bit of background as to how we got to where we are today. And historically, what's happened is every few years or so we get this wonderful unrestricted donations, large donations coming our way, and we're hoping and praying that we'll get another one this year, but we have to plan for what we now know, and right now we don't have one. There's a possibility we might, but we don't really have one that we can point to. In the past, we've talked about fundraising, but we've never really talked about what the amount should be. So I just wanted to put a couple of ideas your way. This is not meant to be a recommendation, such as more of a suggestion, I guess, or just so you can see what the scope would be. So if we were to go out and raise, say, $2 million, that would really help fund our grants from general fund of about $200,000 a year for 10 years, which is a really, you know, I think that should be kind of like our minimum if we do a major fundraising campaign. At the high end, if we wanted to do this fundraising campaign once and never have to do it again, if you raise $6 million and invested the $6 million and assume that we continue to disperse 3.5% a year, that would give us again $200,000 and change forever, to perpetuity. So you'd never have to fundraise again. So I guess, you know, I just wanted to give you some idea of the scope of where the fundraising could potentially go, and this is something obviously that the board would want to consider moving forward. So that concludes the financial aspect of my report. So before I shut up, I'm just going to move along now to a couple of administrative matters. And in the past, we've had always a few questions surrounding, well, how much money do we have in grants for the upcoming year? And it's always a bit of a stab in the dark. We don't really know how much money we're going to get during the year. The only thing we know with certainty is what we had in the past year. So what we've done is we've developed a policy called the General Fund Disbursement Policy. So it sets out very clearly how the funds available for grants is determined, how it's calculated, what happens if we have more money than we need or less money, that sort of thing. But what it does is, going forward, what we're recommending with this policy is that we would determine by the end of January how much money we're having, say for 2017, based on 2016. And you would do that every year. Always in the first month of the year, you would do your calculation based on the previous year's actuals. So this gives Judy and the staff, everybody, a greater sense of certainty as to exactly how much money is available for the upcoming year. So I will leave it to my esteemed colleague, Alex, to make the motion and put that disbursement fund policy to you for your consideration. As part of my ongoing reporting, I'm supposed to report to you on the status of the contingency reserve. So at this point, as of the board meeting date, November 10th, we have not drawn down on our reserve yet. By late December, early January, we are likely to be doing that. But right now, we haven't used it. So that's something that I'm to report to you throughout the year, whether or not we've actually had to draw down on the reserve. So other matters that we have been working on is looking at our donor management system. We've done quite a bit of work looking at our needs and what options are out there available to us. We're trying to decide, are we going to buy something off the shelf? Are we going to get something designed or programmed, written just for us? There's pros and cons to each of it, so we're really going to have a closer look and continue to make sure that we're making the right decision. So we're going to be looking into this in more detail throughout the coming months, and we hope certainly to have something up and running before the end of 2017, because